LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 18th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. You can see I'm not in my usual venue. I'm on the road. I apologize if there's buffering or resolution problems with my live stream. If so, I'll upload a recorded version later. I am way up in the north of Northern California. As I said last week, dropping my daughter off at college. But I still wanted to pick out the clips and give you the show. So thanks for joining me, and give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you like my show, because as usual, I picked out the weekend's, this weekend, the 11 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show tonight, with taking my clips from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. My topic will be the Trump recession, which apparently we are seeing the beginnings of recession, possibly. I'll talk a little bit later about the inverted yield curve in the bond market, if anyone is really interested in that. But it will be a very economics-heavy broadcast tonight, and there'll be multiple clips from Larry Kudlow and from Peter Navarro, White House economic advisors. But then at the end, I will have two Democrats. I'll have Pete Buttigieg, and then at the end, Andrew Yang, talking about sort of the Democratic response to the economic arguments from White House economic advisors. And there were some other news stories this week, and I'll get to those, but I want to start with the political comedy. It's Bill Maher making some jokes about the recession. You know, Bill Maher got in trouble for hoping for a recession, and I think a recession might be our best chance for Trump not getting reelected in 2020, and I think that's why Bill Maher was hoping for a recession, but he kept saying to, Sean Hannity and other people, he's not a genie. If he hopes for something, it doesn't necessarily come true. He's not wishing for it. He's just saying having a recession would not be as bad as having another 4 years of Donald Trump. And that's not what Bill Maher's talking about in his monologue from Friday, but I did take a couple-minute clip here, or no, this is an under 1 minute clip from the monologue. As usual, you can see the entire monologue at a link I put down in the video description. I've also put my clip list. I can't print out my clip list where I am, so I'm actually going to have to look at the online version of my clip list to follow along myself, but there's a link down in the video description to that. And the first clip I'm going to show you, like I said, is Bill Maher's monologue making jokes about a possible recession and Trump, the genius of the genius on the economy, that I will talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Trump, the financial genius, is driving the economy over the cliff. Have you seen that? I mean, for years, every one of the world's economies has been doing fucking great. Growing. Nobody, they said, could screw it up. Enter Trump saying, "Hold my beer." His new slogan is, "Make America Atlantic City again." No. Well, did you see what happened in the stock market this week? I mean, I spent more time gasping for breath than Jeffrey Epstein. Oohing into applause. You don't hear that a lot, but we do it here.
Oohing into applause. That's one of Bill Maher's favorite lines. If you are a long time, I guess I used to be more of a fan of Bill Maher. Now I guess I'm more an observer of Bill Maher. He hasn't, like I've said in previous broadcasts, he hasn't quite done the full Dennis Miller yet. Although I saw Dennis Miller on this new Comedy Central show that comes after The Daily Show with David Spade. So I guess he's still out there saying things that are supposedly funny, but he just went so far right that, I don't know, comedy just isn't conservative most of the time. I mean, there are some exceptions. Drew Carey is kind of conservative, or I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section about whether comedians can be conservative. But I want to get to the actual news clips now about the Trump recession. You saw Bill Maher's jokes about the recession, and this is actually the thing about the Trump recession that is really worrisome. I mean, the good news is Trump might lose, and that's what Chuck Todd says at the beginning of this news summary, that, you know, he does his live news summary, then he goes to the package, and with the packages like the recorded video that they did earlier in the week, anticipating what the news was going to be. And so Chuck Todd here starts off about how Trump had this powerful ally, the economy, and if he loses that powerful ally, he might be in big trouble. And you know what he might do? Trump might actually go negative. Can you imagine Trump going negative? What that kind of world would be like? If he doesn't have a strong economy, he might actually have to become divisive and negative. And, well, I think you get the point I'm trying to make, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this 4.5-minute news summary from Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press this morning over here.
Good Sunday morning. Throughout his presidency, Donald Trump has had one powerful and faithful ally, the economy. More than anything else, he has counted on the economy to help overcome doubts about his style and carry him to re-election. But that ally may be deserting him. This week's stock market tumble, 800 points on Wednesday, was not entirely Mr. Trump's doing, and by Friday, some of that loss was recovered. But the drop can be tied to the uncertainty that has been caused by the trade war Mr. Trump has launched against China. The question for the president: will his supporters, who have either embraced or simply accepted so much of his norm-breaking presidency, be as forgiving of all of those breaking of norms if the economy falters? Our new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, taken before Wednesday's stock market tumble, has the president's approval rating dipping a bit, 43%, 55% disapproving. That 43% of approval sits at the lower end of his very narrow trading range, rarely moving more than 2 or 3 points from one month to the next. But look at this. At the end of 2015, before the Trump presidency, Americans supported free trade by a relatively narrow 10-point margin, 51-41. Now, with President Trump backing away from free trade, fighting China with tariffs, and there's no end in sight, American support for free trade has quadrupled, it seems as if, by a margin of 64-20-70, now a 40-point spread, from a 10-point spread to a 40-point spread. And while some of those changes are likely due to Democrats reflexively opposing anything this president does, some of it also reflects voter anxiety about the president's trade policies, all of which, the Washington Post reports, has left the president a bit rattled as he tries to assure his supporters that the economy remains as strong as ever.
You have no choice but to vote for me, because your 401ks, down the tubes, everything's going to be down the tubes.
President Trump trying to warn voters that if he loses, the stock market will plummet after a week when it did on his watch.
The Dow average plummeting 3%.
A major sell-off here on Wall Street today.
Growing recession fears.
Mr. Trump has banked on a strong economy, making it a central argument for his re-election.
Perhaps the greatest economy we've had in the history of our country. If our opponent ever got into office, instead of being up 62%, instead of those 401ks of yours being up 60, 70, 80, 90%, crash, big crash.
And congressional Republicans have persistently forgiven the president's political weaknesses, arguing that for voters in 2020, it'll be the economy, stupid.
Great prosperity, 50-year low unemployment. That's what the election, I think, is going to be about.
But now, with the economy weakening, despite low unemployment, Mr. Trump, who says he isn't worried, is showing signs of alarm, relentlessly attacking the chair of the Federal Reserve.
If we had a Fed that would lower interest rates, would be like a rocket ship. Jay Powell should be cutting rates. Jay Powell's made a big mistake.
And announcing he will delay his latest tariff threat on China until mid-December. Voters have given Mr. Trump his highest marks on the economy, but he may have little room to grow. Among the 9% of voters who disapprove of Mr. Trump overall, but approve of his handling of the economy, 73% prefer a Democratic candidate for president. Just 5% say Trump should be reelected. Anxious about a downturn, Mr. Trump, who has long campaigned on the politics of grievance, is dialing up the culture wars. On immigration,
give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet.
on race,
Obviously headed up by Elijah Cummings. They've run Baltimore into the ground.
and now on the politics of Israel. On Thursday, the day after the stock market dropped over 800 points, he tweeted that it would show great weakness if Israel allowed Muslim Congresswomen Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib to visit, saying they hate Israel and all Jewish people.
The things that they've said, Omar, Tlaib, what they've said is disgraceful. So I can't imagine why Israel would let them in.
This is a president that is fueling such vicious divisiveness and treating sitting members of Congress in a way, I don't care what party you are, this is wrong.
And joining me now is the president's chief economic advisor, the director of the National Economic...
And like I said, I will have Larry Kudlow and Peter Navarro clips if that's what you're really hot for, although I don't think anyone's really hot for Larry Kudlow or Peter Navarro. But I do want to show you a couple more, well, actually 3 more news summaries, 2 more from real news organizations, and then the Fox News news summary. And what's interesting is that everyone, of course, had to cover the possible recession and the deep drop, the 800-point drop on Wall Street, the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And all of them showed the 800 points, except for Fox News. You'll see at the end, they only showed the percentage drop. They didn't want to show that 800 points because I think that makes it look like a bigger drop in the stock market. But there is still, I thought, as usual, Meet the Press, that was like a 4.5-minute news summary. It was the best news summary from the week. Meet the Press usually puts in the work and the time to really cover everything. And like I said, it was kind of gave you the impression that a bad Trump economy is going to lead to more Trump negativity, more Trump divisiveness. And you can see that is sort of implied in the ABC news summary. That's the clip after next. But this next news summary is CNN State of the Union. Jake Tapper also focusing on the recession like all the news summaries did, but talking a little more about Israel and the grandma, the Rashida Tlaib grandma situation, while also mentioning the inverted yield curve in the bond market that I promised to talk about at some point, and the tariffs and the trade war. And I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch that CNN State of the Union little over a minute news summary from this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is keeping an eye on our retirement accounts. President Trump is wrapping up a working vacation at his Bedminster resort, but he doesn't seem to have used that time to unwind. Instead, last night and this morning, he appears to have been scrolling through Twitter, sharing messages about the crowd size at his recent New Hampshire event, retweeting praise for himself from fans, praising conservative media allied with him, and heaping scorn on the rest of the news media. This weekend, the president's ire extended even to the 90-year-old grandmother of one Muslim American congresswoman after he shattered yet another norm by pushing a foreign ally, Israel, to ban 2 Democratic congresswomen highly critical of Israel from an official visit. This all happening as the nation recovers from a week of whiplash on Wall Street. Fears of a coming recession spiked on the heels of a key economic indicator, what's called an inverted yield curve, on Wednesday, when short-term bond interest rates briefly went higher than long-term rates. Those recession fears reverberating from the farmers in the middle of President Trump's trade war all the way up to the president himself, who this week postponed some planned tariffs on Chinese goods that were set to take effect over the holiday season. Joining me now to discuss this.
And like I said, I'll have the newsmaker clips from Larry Kudlow and Peter Navarro in a bit, but should I try to explain what the inverted yield curve? Did anyone want to try to explain it down in the comment section from the live viewers? Well, basically what happens is the U.S. Treasury sells bonds, like 2-year bonds, 10-year bonds, and 30-year bonds. And you would think that the longer you lock up your money, the better interest rate you're going to get. That's the yield. So The thing is, though, when money starts coming out of the stock market, when people think there's going to be a big drop in the stock market because of a recession, they put their money in those 2-year treasury bonds because that's sort of short term. And when a lot of people put their money in this one place, that means law of supply and demand, economics. I told you I was going to be talking economics. Well, law of supply and demand means more people want it, so the price goes up, yield goes down. That means you get lower interest rates, that's the yield, for locking up your money for 2 years than you do, or that gives you a lower yield than the 10-year. And as it becomes more expensive and the interest rates go down, so you would think you would get longer or more interest for locking your money up for a longer period, but that's not what happens. Anyway, that's the inverted yield curve. I think I explained it right. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section as to whether now you understand it because you heard what I just said, which I don't know. It's kind of complicated, but that was the inverted yield curve. And then the thing I wanted to say about the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, and you're going to see Martha Raddatz, the permanent guest host or alternate host or whatever her title is. She actually talks about how Trump campaigned on putting America first in this brief news summary. And it's actually really talking about how what Trump is doing is antithetical to American values. It's a little bit subtle, but you'll see talking about the Statue of Liberty and the trade war and human rights in Hong Kong, which I think is a nice touch from the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary hosted by Martha Raddatz that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. President Trump campaigned on America First and says he's kept that promise. But at what price? And does that promise extend to all Americans? The president squarely put American citizens first this week when he announced a new rule barring legal immigrants from receiving taxpayer-funded benefits. A top immigration official going so far as to suggest the poem on the Statue of Liberty, widely considered an expression of core American values, should read, "Give me your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet." The president's vision of America First also seemed at odds this week with the founding principle of freedom of expression. He successfully pressured America's close ally Israel to deny entry to 2 sitting members of Congress, both of them Muslim Americans who've been critical of Israel and of him. And then there's his America First trade war with China that contributed to this week's wild swings on Wall Street. The president is yet to close any trade deals, and now Democrats are accusing him of prioritizing his economic tit-for-tat with China over supporting pro-democracy demonstrators in Hong Kong. For more on the fallout from the president's foreign policy moves this week, let's bring in our ABC News team fanned out around the globe, senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell in Hong Kong, James Longman.
So ABC actually went into a lot more depth using those 3 reporters, and they talked about Hong Kong, and they talked about the other issues raised in the news summary. But like I said, I thought that was a good juxtaposition of what Trump is doing with American values, showing how a lot of what Trump is doing is antithetical to American values. I'm looking, I tried to set this up so that I would have natural sunlight because I don't have good lighting for where I am, and there's like all these weird shadows. Sorry about the shadowing, but anyway, I'm going to show you the, and that I set up this book here. I brought one of my copies of the New Jim Crow. That was that, and I set it up here because I don't have a bookshelf behind me. So that's like my one book here is my real anchor book is the New Jim Crow. So that's why that's over there over my shoulder. This whole setup is difficult to deal with, but I did want to do the show on Sunday, even though I'm out of town. Like I said. Up here in the forests of very northern California. And anyway, like I said, I want to juxtapose those last 3 news summaries with the Fox News news summary. Dana Perino was in for Chris Wallace this week. and she did a brief news summary, did mention the recession, but also, talking about how the Dow plunged, but also recovered. Don't forget, it recovered. That, Fox News is Trump TV, as we know, and then Kevin Corke does this summary that, talks about the possibility, some say the possibility of recession, but also, it could be, some are completely convinced that our economy is the strongest in the world. I mean, like I said, on Fox News, even on the supposedly straight news programs like Fox News Sunday, it seems like what you're about to watch is, it could have been written by whoever is in charge of the press office. What's her name? Who used to work for Melania Trump? Stephanie something. Anyway, she could have written this just as well as the supposed journalists at Fox News, Dana Perino and Kevin Corke, which I will talk about a little more after we watch that final news summary for this week over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. There are signs of calm after a turbulent week. President Trump announced he'll delay tariffs on Chinese goods in order to save holiday sales. Now, that's a seeming admission the U.S.-China trade war could hurt U.S. consumers. The Dow plunged 800 points Wednesday, but recovered some losses. Right now, the president is in Bedminster, New Jersey. In a moment, we'll speak live with White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow about reports the White House is trying to reassure key players the economy is on firm footing. But first, Kevin Corke is live with us now with the latest. Kevin?
Dana, thanks to an inverted yield curve, fears of the dreaded R word, recession, are sweeping from Wall Street to Main Street, but the White House is doubling down on its economic policies, completely convinced the U.S. economy is not just the best in the world, it's the best bet for American voters in 2020. If the week that was on Wall Street earned a letter grade, it would get a V for volatility, with the Dow imitating a roller coaster, sliding 1.5%. A reaction, say experts, to a number of factors, including the U.S.-China trade dispute, ongoing unrest in Hong Kong, and the inverted yield curve, with longer notes like the 10-year offering less than shorter treasuries like the 2-year, even as the 30-year yield fell to an all-time record low. And while there are signs of optimism, for example, retail sales have jumped 3.4% from a year ago, consumer confidence has fallen 6.4% from July.
I will never, ever let you down. That I can tell you, ever.
Undaunted, President Trump took his message of economic evangelism on the road to New Hampshire this week, a key 2020 target for the GOP, where unemployment is low and Democratic promises of an economic overhaul have been met with skepticism.
You have no choice but to vote for me because your 401ks, down the tubes, everything's going to be down the tubes. So whether you love me or hate me, you got to vote for me.
On Friday, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, will make comments on the economy. Of course, he is a frequent target of the president's ire. It'll give us a chance to measure the impact on the markets and obviously gauge White House reaction as well. Dana?
All right.
So there you have your Fox News news summary. I think I pretty much criticized it before I showed it. I'm trying to sit back so that my whole face is in the light. Am I getting whole? I can like barely even see because I've got like direct sunlight. It's sunset here. The sun is like right over there, but there's a little bit of shade too. So sorry about the lighting, but I know you probably don't care about the lighting at all. But it's one of the weird things about being on the road. And anyway, like I said, those are the news summaries. I think Fox News was a lot more Trump TV and biased towards the Trump administration than the previous 3 news summaries. Face the Nation didn't really do a news summary, and there was like a 15-second news summary from Margaret Brennan before she went to the White House economic. They had a White House economic advisor on all the programs. Larry Kudlow was on some, and Peter Navarro was on the others. I have 2 Larry Kudlows, 2 Peter Navarros, and then to like cleanse our brains from all that, I have 2 Democrats, Pete Buttigieg and Andrew Yang, to end the program, all talking about economics, though, and the possibility of recession, although Andrew Yang, I have talking about his signature idea of the universal basic income and the value-added tax and how that's sort of I have like Pete Buttigieg giving the conventional Democratic response to the Republican nonsense you're about to hear, and then Andrew Yang gives a much more unconventional response. But let me show you the Republican nonsense first, and here is Larry Kudlow first talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News's Meet the Press, where Chuck Todd asks, of course, the question that everyone's asking: do you see a recession coming? And of course, he talks about his blockbuster numbers and his optimism. And then I actually edited a little part out and put in another part about the optimism, where Chuck Todd does a great follow-up question about Larry Kudlow's optimism right before the big crash in 2008, back in December 2007. And I will talk about all of that a little more with you after we watch those two NBC News Meet the Press clips edited together over here.
Let me start with what you see from the White House. The private sector seems to be concerned about particularly the trade war with China, that there are some rough waters ahead, maybe a recession, that those odds have risen. What do you see?
Well, I tell you what, I sure don't see a recession. We had some blockbuster retail sales consumer numbers towards the back end of last week, really blockbuster numbers. And in fact, despite a lot of worries with the volatile stock market, most economists on Wall Street towards the end of the week have been marking up their forecast for the third and fourth quarter. That echoes our view. You know, what we've got here, consumers are working at higher wages. Right. They are spending at a rapid pace. They're actually saving also while they're spending. That's an ideal situation. So I think actually the second half of the economy is going to be very good in 2019. No, I don't see a recession. And let me have just one theme, Chuck. Sure. Just one theme. We're doing pretty darn well, in my judgment. Let's not be afraid of optimism. Let's not be afraid of optimism. It's a funny sign of our times. And I think there's a very optimistic economy going on out there. But Chuck Todd? So I actually think it's a pretty good story. And again, let me echo my theme. Let's not be afraid of some optimism.
Okay, you say that, but you know, you actually said that in 2007, right before the second worst downturn in American history. This is what you wrote. There's no recession coming. This is in December of 2007. The pessimistas were wrong. It's not going to happen. The Bush boom is alive and well. It's finishing up its 6th consecutive year with more to come. The more to come was a massive downturn. So I admire your optimism, but the data is pointing in another direction.
Well, I plead guilty to that late 2007 forecast. I plead guilty. By the way, every other forecaster, CBO,
you weren't alone. You weren't
OMB,
alone. That's
Blue
right.
Chip,
you weren't alone.
They were all there. However, just a wee bit of Kudlow defense now. By February and March, on CNBC in those days, I did go to the recession call. So I will plead that I did see it. I don't know that anybody saw that kind of crash. But look, this is not then. This is not then. Our banks are well capitalized. Our financial system's in very good shape. And I must say, as the president is transforming and rebuilding this economy, he deserves enormous credit. A new policy of lower taxes and regulation and energy opening and trade reform. You know, we didn't quite get to 3%, but look, Chuck, the first 2 years of the Obama administration, we were just a hair below 3%. Okay. We're moving in the same direction. And let's be honest here, we've faced severe monetary tightening, 7 rate hikes in 2017 and 2018. I don't think all that was necessary. It's a miracle we were able to continue as well as we're doing. And again, bond rates are falling, 100 basis points decline. That's good for mortgages. That's good for business. And I think the Federal Reserve is going to now be following through lower interest rates at the low end because the bond rates have fallen, and that's the way that game usually works. And I think that's going to be a big help.
So that was quite a bit of rosy scenario-ism from Larry Kudlow. You heard the optimism line, and he's an optimist. And Chuck Todd said, "Fair enough," but he had that good follow-up about his optimism back in December 2007. I couldn't really tell you whether in February or March if Larry Kudlow was already predicting a recession, but he claims that's true. So I suppose there's some chance it's true, but. The next clip I want to show is also Larry Kudlow, and it's Dana Perino over on Fox News Sunday, and this is supporting my argument about Fox News bias that, there is a little bit like some say that there might be a recession, but also there are strong signs in the economy and, mixed bag of economic indicators. And, are you going to take any further steps? And, that's the question. The real question is, has Trump totally screwed up the economy from the trade war? Although there's a little bit of that in the follow-up. And then you'll see Dana Perino reacts very differently to the whole optimism question than, Chuck Todd said fair enough. But Dana Perino, jumps to the side of the Trump administration at the end of the clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
So, Larry, there's been a mixed bag of economic numbers this week. We were talking just about it. Kevin showed it. The Dow dropped, then it bounced back. Retail sales are up. Job growth continues. Manufacturing slowing down. Is the administration considering any new legislative policies or executive actions to stave off what some are saying could be a possible coming recession?
Well, first of all, I don't see a recession at all. Second of all, the Trump pro-growth program, which I believe has been succeeding, lower tax rates, big rollback of regulations, energy opening, trade reform, we're going to stay with that. We believe that's the heart of the free enterprise. We want an incentive-oriented supply-side economy, providing opportunities for everybody across the board. And as your report mentioned, look, we had blowout retail sales. Let me just pause there. Consumers, first of all, they're working. The employment numbers are terrific. Second of all, they're working at much higher wages. Third of all, they're spending. And fourth of all, interestingly, they are saving even while they're spending. That's about as good as it gets. And I notice at the end of the week, a lot of the Wall Street firms have been marking up their economic growth forecast. I think we're in pretty good shape, and I want to just say, we should not be afraid of optimism. I don't know what it is. Everybody wants to talk about pessimism, recession.
Is that why the president...
There's no recession on the horizon.
Is that why
What's wrong with a little optimism, Dan?
You know me. I'm an optimist. But I wonder if that's why the president called some of the banks on that day on Wednesday when it went down. Is your message from the White House now, there is no recession coming, and we are just calling to assure you that we think the economy is on firm footing and no additional measures are needed?
I don't think the additional measures are needed. Now,
you know me, I'm an optimist. I think, is that like Dana Perino saying, you know me, I'm on the side of Trump and Republicans because this is Fox News and we are not a news organization or whatever maybe I'm extrapolating a little bit, but that was what I took from the end of that particular clip, and I think I pretty much pre-criticized the Fox News questioning of Larry Kudlow there, and it was much weaker than the Chuck Todd questioning of Larry Kudlow in the previous clip. And now I want to juxtapose two different ways of questioning Peter Navarro, who's another White House economic advisor. He's like, I believe his, what do I have his title as? He is the director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy, whatever that means. But he is another member of the Trump administration who has like weird views on tariffs and is and trade wars, who thinks, is one of the people who is telling Trump that trade wars are good. And the thing is, trade wars, everybody loses in a trade war. That's why we don't do trade wars anymore, except, and that was sort of a bipartisan agreement till Trump came along. And anyway, I want to juxtapose Jake Tapper and Martha Raddatz cross-examining Peter Navarro about the recession. Jake Tapper will cross-examine him using... he talks about the negative yield curve, and Peter Navarro claims that technically not an inverted yield curve, not negative, inverted yield curve. And Jake Tapper cross-examines him about the folly of trade wars, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that CNN State of the Union clip. This is actually, I think, the longest clip that I'm going to show you, about 5 minutes long, and then I will talk about it with you after we watch together over here.
So let me start with the economy, obviously the basic state of the economy, in addition to the inverted yield curve, which has happened before every recession in the last half century. I know it is now since flattened, but it did exist there for a little bit on Wednesday. 9 major countries are either in recession or on the brink of one, perhaps even a bigger concern than the inverted yield curve. Other than pushing the Fed to lower interest rates, what is the administration doing to stave off any potential recession from coming here?
So let's clear up this inverted yield curve thing. I didn't write the book on it, but I've written several books about the yield curve as a leading economic indicator. Technically, we did not have a yield curve inversion. An inverted yield curve requires a big spread between the short and the long end. What
As
we had
opposed
is
to a smaller one.
Correct. Well, all we've had is a flat yield curve.
Well, it was inverted for a little bit.
That's not technically an inversion. It's a flat curve, which is a very weak signal of any possibility. And in this case, the flat curve is actually the result of a very strong Trump economy. What we see now is foreign capital coming to the best game on the globe, which is the Trump economy. It's going into our stock market. But when it goes into the bond market on the long end, it bids up bond prices and bids down yields, and you get the flat curve. The best thing we need to do now, and I think this is part of the bullish scenario I have, the Federal Reserve is going to embark on a very aggressive interest rate cuts through the end of the year. That'll lower the short end, but more importantly, it'll stop suppressing our investment directly and suppressing our exports indirectly.
Let me ask you, what do you mean by suppressing? Because there's plenty, as you know, there is lots of liquidity. There's lots of money out there, $15 trillion being borrowed from Germany, from other countries in Europe, from Japan, where the interest rate is negative or 0%. And what I'm hearing from experts is the issue as to why this money's not being invested is because of instability, because of the trade war with China, and because of political instability in the U.S.
So here's what we know. Let's go look at the Q2 numbers. We came in at 2.1%. When the Fed started raising rates, it raised it over 100 basis points. Broad consensus, too far, too fast. At the same time it was doing that, the dollar went up by almost 10%. So when you look at the Q2 data, 2.1%, we should have came in at 3. We lost 2/3 of a point simply on exports alone due to the indirect currency effect, and we lost some in commercial real estate because of the uncertainty over what the Fed policy was going to do, and we had an inventory drawdown, which will bounce back.
You don't think the trade war has anything to do with this?
No,
let me just say, the Fed chair, when he lowered interest rates recently, said it was because of, quote, trade tensions, which do seem to be having a significant effect on the economy. You're not acknowledging that the trade war has anything to do with this?
So the Federal Reserve chairman should look in the mirror and say, I raised rates too far, too fast, and I cost this economy a full percentage point of growth. And interestingly, earlier this week, I was on television just before James Bullard, who's on the Board of Governors. And he basically is my best witness as to why we're going to have a very good economy. He said that the economy was strong. He also committed to interest rate reductions not because we have a weak economy, but because we can grow faster without generating inflation. That's the key thing here. What Jay Powell did not understand is that the Trump economy can grow at 3% without generating inflation, and that's what we should be doing. We also need help, not just from the Fed, we need help from Congress right now. The other thing that needs to fall into place for a really solid
is the trade deal, the USMCA.
U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And let me just say, that's at least a point of growth. There's several 100,000 new jobs, 75,000 in the auto sector. And we think by early October, if Congress can rise above partisan politics, past that, we'll have Federal Reserve rate cuts. And the last thing is, that's going to be really important, the European Central Bank has committed now to a very aggressive monetary easing that they're going to begin in September, cutting rates, quantitative easing. Why does that matter for us? That'll lift Europe. They'll buy more of our exports, and that'll help everything. So I see a bullish scenario
at all
here.
that the trade deal, that the trade wars and the tariffs
that's correct.
have anything to do with
That's
this?
correct.
You
The tariffs are hurting China. China's bearing the entire burden of the tariffs
That's
in
not
terms of consumer. Hang on.
what a lot of experts say.
This is what this expert says. What we see here unequivocally is that China is bearing the burden by lowering their prices.
Right.
They lowered the value of the yuan by 12% to offset the tariffs. And here's the most important part of the pain on them rather than pain on us. We're seeing production, investment, supply chain, sourcing move.
But Peter,
it's hemorrhaging from China. And the good news is it's going into Southeast Asia and it's coming here.
Listen
That's
to
good
the
for
president
America.
of the.
So I thought Jake Tapper did a pretty good job cross-examining Peter Navarro using the nonsensical talking points that Peter Navarro was using, and specifically talking to him about how the trade war was really hurting the U.S. economy, and how it's not true that China's bearing the burden of that, and he, used all these different sources for that. But I thought actually Martha Raddatz in the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip that I'm going to show next, when she was cross-examining Peter Navarro, I think she used a source that was an even better source that is hard for someone in the Trump administration to refute, because it's the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, which of course, like Fox News, is owned by News Corp, Rupert Murdoch, and the whole conglomerate that is supporting Trump and his takeover of the Republican Party. And even they are having problems with Trump isn't a Republican when it comes to free trade. You saw that Meet the Press news summary where I forgot to mention one of the things Chuck Todd did there was he claimed that the support for free trade had quadrupled, while it was actually the spread between support and opposition for free trade. The spread had quadrupled, but even that is pretty significant because Republicans have always supported free trade supposedly, and Democrats, they want fair trade, good for workers, and the Trump administration. Can you hear what I'm saying? The Trump administration, that's a little better, has not been really good for workers and or for fair trade, or I guess it remains to be seen if they get any deals. Basically, the Trump administration blows up deals like NAFTA and then renegotiates a deal very similar to the previous deal, but one that Trump can take credit for. And, that's sort of the modus operandi of the Trump administration. But like I said, this last Peter Navarro clip is Martha Raddatz cross-examining him using the Economic Republicans, the Wall Street Journal editorial board. And it's kind of interesting to see someone from the Trump administration attack economic Republicans, the News Corp Republicans from Fox News, it's Wall Street Journal, same ownership as Fox News. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final White House economic advisor clip before I get to the Pete Buttigieg and Andrew Yang clips over here.
As I'm sure you're well aware, the Wall Street Journal editorial board this month dubbed this the Navarro Recession, and they wrote a second editorial this week called the Navarro Recession 2, saying Mr. Navarro and President Trump spent Wednesday blaming the Federal Reserve for the market meltdown, and we suppose any scapegoat will do in a storm. We've been warning for 2 years that trade wars have economic consequences, but the wizards of protectionism told Mr. Trump not to worry. The key to avoiding the worst first is to restore a sense of policy, calm, and confidence. And I would add to that, businesses are not blaming the Federal Reserve. For example, the National Retail Federation explicitly said uncertainty for business and the new tariffs will result in higher costs for consumers and slow the U.S. economy. So clearly not everyone agrees with you.
So let's start with the Wall Street Journal. When the Main Street Journal starts attacking this administration, that is when we worry. The question for the Wall Street Journal is, where was the Wall Street Journal beginning in 2001 when China got into the World Trade Organization and we watched the exodus of over 70,000 of our factories, over 5 million manufacturing jobs? Why isn't the Wall Street Journal been editorializing over the last 10 years about China's hacking our computers to steal trade secrets, about stealing our intellectual property, about forcing the technology transfer from our companies, about the currency manipulation that occurred for over a decade? So the Wall Street Journal, look.
We don't have a trade deal, though.
It's called the Wall Street Journal for a reason, okay? It represents Wall Street. And the Wall Street Journal never saw an American job it didn't want to offshore.
Well, let's talk about tariffs, which has consumers concerned and has.
So, wow, it's not something you normally see, the attack on the Wall Street Journal and Wall Street from the Trump administration. And, well, Peter Navarro, he's kind of like a way out there guy whose economic theories don't jibe with most economists. So I guess it makes sense that he doesn't even jibe with the other Republican economists at the Wall Street Journal editorial page. But that just shows how far out of the box the Trump administration has gone with its trade war and its tariffs. And it's, I mean, nobody but, I mean, it's actually something, if you've watched what Donald Trump has said over multiple decades, he used to be a Democrat, now he's a Republican, and he's changed, he's changed on LGBT rights and all sorts of different issues. But one thing that he's been saying over and over again, in the earliest years, he used to say, the big threat is Japan, but then after the Japanese economy started to stagnate, all of a sudden it was China, and then the trade deficit with China and trade with China, and getting screwed by China, that is one of the things that Trump is one of his fundamental issues that he's been saying for a really, really long time. So I guess it isn't all that surprising that he's found people like Larry Kudlow and Peter Navarro, especially Larry Kudlow, like totally changed all of his views on tariffs to come to the Trump administration and to advocate for this trade war. Peter Navarro, he was always a trade warrior, as you saw when I played those last 4 clips. But getting beyond all that weird Republican nonsense, I want to show the conventional Democratic response from Pete Buttigieg, and then a more unconventional, Democratic response from Andrew Yang, because he's running to be the Democratic nominee for president, and he's actually qualified for even the debates on ABC at the end of September, and that'll be the final clip I show. But first, here's Pete Buttigieg over on CNN State of the Union. He actually is responding to what Jake Tapper talking to Peter Navarro in the clip before last that I showed, and basically giving, like I said, a pretty conventional Democratic response, but fairly compelling argument as to why all that Republican nonsense is actually nonsense. And in the process, I think Pete Buttigieg shows some good understanding of the fundamental Chinese model that Trump is not going to be able to change over in this clip.
In my interview with the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, President Trump says taking his tariffs off China now would be, quote, economic surrender, saying the U.S. cannot make a trade deal without dialing up more pressure. You have vowed to lift those tariffs if you become president. What makes you think China would make a trade deal with you as president without the kind of pressure that President Trump is now exerting with these tariffs?
Well, we have a lot of different forms of leverage in the relationship, but it's also a fool's errand to think you're going to be able to get China to change the fundamentals of their economic model by poking them in the eye with some tariffs. And by the way, despite all of the noise from that previous interview, there's some basic facts here that you can't escape. And one of them is that American farmers are getting killed. I was just in Iowa, in rural parts of the state, talking with a lot of farmers who, many of whom are Republicans or supported this president, and are now asking the question, how much longer are we supposed to take one for the team? The president has said repeatedly that he's on the cusp of getting a deal. The president has failed to deliver a deal, and I expect he will continue to do so. And in the meantime, we're paying the cost of these tariffs. We're going to see even more in the prices of consumer goods. The president apparently is aware of this because he said he was going to delay them till Christmas. What are we supposed to do after Christmas? There is clearly no strategy for dealing with the trade war in a way that will actually lead to results for American farmers or American consumers. And part of the reason is that this is not what it's going to take to actually guide China into a different direction. This is about a lot more than just some tariffs. Look, you consider the position that China is in now, and you consider our loss of domestic competitiveness because we're not even investing at home in education, infrastructure, health, the things that are going to allow us to be a world leader into the 21st century. If we're neglecting that, none of this is going to matter. Meanwhile, you've got an economy that is not working for most Americans. There's a big debate going on right now over whether we're on the cusp of a recession. I think we probably are, but the more important thing is even during an expansion, most Americans haven't been able to get ahead. That is a huge problem, and the president has made it abundantly clear that he doesn't care. When it comes to rural America, I think to him, it's just the scenery that he sees out the helicopter window on the way to his golf course. And when it comes to American consumers, he is completely out of touch with the impact it's going to have on the prices we pay for our goods as a result of a trade war in which both sides will lose.
South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
The scenery that he sees outside his helicopter on the way to his golf course, that's a good line. And that was actually not a bad analysis from Pete Buttigieg. He's definitely a smart guy and has a big future. Whether his future is going to be the Democratic nominee for president, I think that's a really outside possibility, but you can disagree with me down in the comment section. Back 4 years ago, I was saying that I thought Trump had a ceiling of support and that he couldn't be president or even the Republican nominee. So take my predictions with a grain of salt based on that big failure to see what was going to happen. Or I don't know, maybe something happened and I'm in the wrong alternate universe and Trump should never have been president, and I was right all along. No, that's probably not true, but I'm just going off into my fantasy there, I guess. But sometimes I think I'm in the wrong alternate universe, and I don't know, maybe somewhere there's Spock with a beard. I don't know, but anyway, I don't have any Spock paraphernalia behind me. All I have is the new Jim Crow over here. That's all I could bring on my weird... Oh, it looks like the lighting has kind of resolved. I don't have direct sunlight, but it doesn't look all that bad. I saw somebody in the comment section say my lighting is good now, and I'm not staring directly into the sunset. So I will finish up the show with Andrew Yang, as I promised in the title of this video, and when I introduced my clips at the beginning, the final 11th clip is Andrew Yang talking to Margaret Brennan on CBS's Face the Nation. And if you watched my debate clip roundup in June, you saw that I tried to get a little bit of Andrew Yang, and I didn't do a debate clip roundup after that. But actually, this clip is almost, it could be almost a political ad for Andrew Yang. At least at the beginning, it's almost like Margaret Brennan is giving him like softball questions like, tell me about your like signature issue of universal basic income and how it would work and what are the jobs that are going to disappear is the first question. And then there are some a little bit more incisive follow-up questions from Margaret Brennan at the end, but it's sort of a mixture of softball and confrontational questions, I guess, and Andrew Yang gets a good opportunity to talk about both universal basic income and his value-added tax and how it will all work. And that's the final news clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
That'll work for both sides.
The jobless rate in this country is at a historic low, as you heard the White House make the case. But you are arguing that you see problems with income inequality in this country and that huge classes of jobs are going to disappear because people will be replaced by machines. What jobs are going away entirely?
Well, Americans watching this right now are seeing their Main Street stores close as 30% of American malls and stores shut their doors forever. And the reason for that is that Amazon's absorbing $20 billion in business every year and paying zero in taxes in return. So these economic changes helped get Donald Trump elected. We automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all of the swing states in the Midwest. And now that automation trend is going to come to retail, call centers, fast food, and eventually truck drivers, which is the most common job in 29 states in this country. This is the true economic transformation that we have to come together and address as a society as quickly as we can.
And part of your solution is to give everyone $1,000 a month. This is a universal basic income. It's been supported by Mark Zuckerberg, other entrepreneurs. But how do you actually say that this is going to incentivize people to work? Isn't the American dream about working hard to achieve something, not a government handout?
Well, Americans will work even harder when they get the resources in place to actually get ahead. This is the trickle-up economy from our people, families, and communities up. It will create over 2 million new jobs in our communities because the money will go right into local Main Street businesses, to car repairs, daycare expenses, Little League signups. And that's where the economic value needs to go in order to create jobs where people live and work.
And you want to put in a 10% tax, a value-added tax on transactions, on consumer purchases in order to pay for all this. You put it at cost about $2 trillion. But I'm wondering, what example do you have of this actually working in another country? Like Saudi Arabia has this, and you don't see them as a hub of innovation.
Well, if you look, Margaret, every other developed economy already has a mechanism just like this. Europe, Canada, Asia, everyone has figured out that you can't have a $1 trillion tech company like Amazon pay zero in taxes, less than everyone who's watching this right now. That doesn't make any sense, and the American people know it. So this has already been figured out by every other developed economy.
You're talking about a value-added tax.
And we need to follow suit.
But
yeah, that's exactly right.
But in terms of the universal basic income, the $1,000 you want to give every American.
Yeah, so if we look within our own country, Alaska's had a dividend of $1,000 to $2,000 per individual for almost 40 years. It was passed by a Republican governor. It's wildly popular. It's created thousands of jobs right there in Alaska. So you don't even need to look abroad. They call it the oil check in Alaska. We're going to call this the tech check. It's going to help rejuvenate American Main Street businesses and give us all a path forward.
Andrew Yang, it's an interesting...
So, like I said before I introduced that clip, Margaret Brennan sort of started off with the softball questioning, gave Andrew Yang the opportunity to talk about both his universal basic income proposal and the value-added tax that would pay for it. I like the whole tech check idea and the idea of helping people who are being displaced by artificial intelligence, and especially the drivers. You know, I spent multiple years working as a driver. First, I worked as a pizza delivery driver and then an airport shuttle driver at Los Angeles International Airport for about a year. You know, if you've ever taken, I think, Super Shuttle, it was something like Super Shuttle where you like pick up multiple people at the airport and then ride share them to their homes. And so I understand people who do driving, and that there are many people, including drivers, who are going to be displaced by artificial intelligence. And one of the things, if you watch my June debate clip roundup, you saw that I mentioned something that Chris Hayes said on MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes, that the primary debates and the primary process is both about finding the optimal candidate, but it's also sort of a sifting of ideas, and some of the ideas become prominent even if the candidates who propose them aren't as prominent, like the decriminalizing border crossing was one of the ideas from Julian Castro in the June debates that became prominent, even though Julian Castro is certainly not one of the top tier candidates. Well, I don't know whether Andrew Yang's ideas are going to have a stronger showing than Andrew Yang himself. He is in the September debates. It's hard for me to see how Andrew Yang is going to become going to become the Democratic nominee for president, but the universal basic income funded by a value-added tax that makes sure that Amazon and other big tech corporations don't pay zero taxes, and it basically subsidizes people who are displaced by automation and artificial intelligence. I see that as a good idea. So you can, whether Andrew Yang is the candidate, you can let me know what you think about those ideas that Margaret Brennan brought out on CBS's Face the Nation there. And that was my final news clip. I do have sort of a Dash and Sandy clip. First, I want to thank the people who supported the show through Super Chat. I got 3 Super Chat contributions I saw here. From Nelson and Lulu Girl, thank you. I'm doing this show on the road. You can see I'm in like a weird situation here, and if that's because this is the 330th Sunday in a row. Occasionally I've had to delay till Monday, but I seem to have good internet access, at least good enough internet access here to spend the day picking out the clips and adding my commentary and media criticism. And if you appreciate that, then you can give me contributions like Nelson 100 and Lulu Girl did there through Super Chat, or you can become a patron at Patreon at a link I put down in the video description, or you can give me direct contributions financially through PayPal at a link down there, or just give me a supportive comment, a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. And before I finish, I don't have a Dash and Sandy clip, but I want to answer Lulu Girl's question about what happened to Dash and Sandy. And they are being taken care of by a pet sitter. And even though I don't have a Dash and Sandy clip, I have like 2, I think, live photos that may have like a little bit of video involved in the, and this is from the pet sitter as to how Dash and Sandy are doing. It's like 2 separate pictures that I'm putting together here. That was just the Dash clip. Where's the Sandy clip? Is this Sandy? Let's try the Sandy clip. So those are still photos. When they were like live photos, there was like a 1 or 2 second clip there when I watched them. But anyway, that's Dash and Sandy being taken care of by the pet sitter. And to answer Lulu Girl's question about who's taking care of Dash and Sandy, I'll be back with Dash and Sandy in the next day or 2, and I will be back next Sunday giving my regular Sunday live clip roundup. Not in this weird situation, but I do have the new Jim Crow behind me. I have, well, whatever. I won't even deal with the Constitution and the sticker, but thanks for joining me, and I should finish up the show, and I'll be back next week from my regular venue and locale, and until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.